There is a moment before the first moment, and the Greeks had a word for it, and the word does not mean what you think it means. Picture, if it helps, a hillside in Boeotia at the very end of the night, an hour before any light. The sheep are still folded. The grass holds the cold. There is a man sitting there who keeps those sheep and who will later say that something spoke to him on this hill and told him what to write. And what he wrote begins with the oldest question anyone can ask, which is what there was before there was anything. His answer is one word, and it is the strangest word in the whole of Greek religion, because for 2,500 years it has meant the opposite of what he meant by it. So the question for tonight is this: what did the people who invented our word for disorder actually think was there at the beginning, and how did their answer turn into its own opposite? If these ancient stories help you rest, subscribe so the next story can find you at bedtime. We will take it slowly, because it is not a story with a plot and it does not need to be hurried. We will start with that one word and what it really said. Then we will meet the 4 or 5 beings who came first, depending on which poet you ask, and notice that one of them is not a place or a substance, but a feeling. We will spend a long time with Night, who is the most powerful figure in early Greek thought, and who almost nobody has heard of, and with her children, who are the difficult parts of being alive, listed by name. We will look at the entirely different beginnings that other Greeks preferred, involving an egg, a serpent, and a goddess called Necessity, who is stronger than the gods. And then, at the end, we will follow the names outward into a volcano in Antarctica, a ship lost in the ice, a word for hypnosis, and a small, cold world beyond Neptune whose discovery started an argument and was named for the goddess of arguments. The word is chaos, and in Hesiod it does not mean confusion, disorder, or a churning mess of unformed matter. It comes from a root meaning to gape or to yawn, and it is related to the words for chasm and for the throat. What it describes is a gap, an opening, room. That is all it is, not a substance, not a soup, not a storm. The first thing is the fact that there is somewhere for things to be. Hesiod does not even say it was created. His line is that chaos came to be first of all, and the verb he uses leaves it deliberately vague whether that means it appeared, or was born, or simply was already the case. He does not say from what. He does not appear to think the question has an answer. The turn into our meaning happened much later, and mostly in Latin. Ovid, writing at the very beginning of the Common Era, opens the Metamorphoses with a description of the world before the world, and he describes a rude and undigested mass, a shapeless heap in which the seeds of things fought one another, where cold struggled with hot and soft with hard. He calls that chaos. That is Roman Stoic physics wearing a Greek name, and it is not what Hesiod said. But Ovid was read continuously for the next 2,000 years, and Hesiod was not, so Ovid's version won. When we say chaos now, we mean Ovid's churning heap, not the Greek gap. It is worth holding that difference for a moment, because the two beginnings are so unlike each other. One says that at first there was a mess. The other says that at first there was space, and that space is not nothing, and that everything after it is the story of that space being filled. After the gap, Hesiod names 3 more, and then a 4th that does not fit with the others at all. Gaia, the earth, broad-breasted, the ever-sure foundation of all things. Tartaros, misty, in the depths beneath the wide-pathed ground. And Eros, who the poem says is the most beautiful among the deathless gods, who loosens the limbs and overcomes the mind and the thoughtful counsel of all gods and all men. Then, out of chaos itself, 2 more. Erebos, which is darkness, and Black Nyx, which is night. Look at that list for a moment, because it is doing something careful. 2 of them are places you could stand on or fall into. 1 is a darkness, 1 is a night, and 1 is desire. There is no obvious reason for desire to be in that list. It is not a location, it does not have a substance, and nothing has yet been born that could feel it. But without it, nothing further can happen, because everything that comes next in the poem comes from something joining with something else. And Hesiod puts the principle of joining into the world before any of the things that will do the joining exist. The Greeks began the universe with a gap, a flaw, a basement, a darkness, and the reason things come together. Erebos and Nyx were both born out of the gap, which makes them brother and sister, and the poem says that night lay with darkness and bore ether and hemera. Ether is the bright upper air, the thin shining stuff above the ordinary sky, where the gods breathe, distinct from the lower air that we live in. Hemera is day. Take the shape of that seriously for a moment. Light is the child of darkness. Day is the daughter of night. Not her opponent, not her rival, not the thing that defeats her, her child. This is not an accident of storytelling. The Greeks reckoned their days from sunset, so that the night came first, and the daylight followed it, and a festival that fell on a given day began the evening before. The Athenian calendar worked this way, and so did several others in the ancient Mediterranean. When they said that day was born from night, they were describing the order they actually lived in. There is a longer consequence in it too. In this cosmology, nothing is destroyed by its opposite. Everything is produced by what came before, including the things that appear to contradict it. Nobody is fighting yet. That will start later, with the Titans. Nyx is the most powerful figure in early Greek poetry that almost nobody has heard of, and the evidence for it is a single scene. It occurs in the Iliad, in the 14th book. Hera wants sleep to put Zeus into a deep sleep so that the war can be interfered with while he is not looking. Sleep refuses, and he explains why by telling her what happened the last time she asked him for this favor. He says that the last time Zeus woke up furious and hunted him through the house and would have thrown him out of the bright air into the sea to be lost, had night not saved him. He fled to night, and she hid him, and Zeus stopped. And sleep gives the reason. He says that Zeus held back, angry as he was, because he was unwilling to do anything displeasing to swift night. That is the only place in the whole of Homer where the king of the gods is described as backing down. Not out of law, not out of fear of a stronger fighter, but because the person sheltering the fugitive was night, and he would not risk offending her. Hesiod does not explain her either. He simply calls her deadly night and destructive night, and says that she is wrapped in a dark mist, Her house is at the edge of the world, in the same corner as Tartaros, and she goes out over the earth every evening carrying Sleep, her son, in her arms. She has no temple worth the name, and no myths of her own in which she is the protagonist. What she has is that everyone, including Zeus, is careful around her. And then Hesiod does something that stops the poem cold for 18 lines. He lists her children, and she has them without a father. He says plainly that she bore them, having lain with none. Here is the list, and it is worth going through slowly, because it is one of the strangest and most honest passages in Greek literature. Moros, which is doom, the appointed end. Care, black fate, the violent death that comes to a particular person. Thanatos, death itself, the fact of it. Hypnos, sleep, and the tribe of dreams, whom the poem names as a group rather than individually. Then, and Hesiod pauses to say again that she bore these with no father either, Momos, who is blame or mockery, and Oisis, who is misery and hardship. The Hesperides, who keep the golden apples beyond Okeanos, which sits oddly in this company and is the one bright thing in the list. The Moirai and the Keres, who give men at their birth both good and evil to have, and who pursue the transgressions of men and of gods, and whose anger does not stop until they have paid. Nemesis, retribution, a trouble to mortals. Apatei, deceit. Philotes, affection or love in the physical sense. Geras, old age. And last, hard-hearted Eris, strife. That is the list. Doom, violent death, sleep, dreams, blame, misery, the golden apples, fate, retribution, deceit, love, old age, and discord. There is no war in it, and no monsters. It is a list of the conditions of being alive, and specifically, of the ones nobody chooses. And the Greeks put every one of them in the same family, born from the same mother, at the same point in the sequence, before the gods existed, and long before there was anyone to suffer them. They are not punishments. Nobody assigned them. They were there first. Two of that list have the same job description and are treated completely differently. Hypnos and Thanatos are brothers, and they are frequently shown together, particularly on white ground funeral vases, as two winged young men lifting a body between them and carrying it carefully. Hesiod describes them as living in the same place and being nothing alike. He says that sleep roams peaceably over the earth and the wide back of the sea and is gentle to men, but that the other has a heart of iron and a spirit of pitiless bronze, and that whomever he takes he holds, and that he is hateful even to the deathless gods. The Greeks named them brothers because the resemblance is obvious, and then spent their poetry insisting that the resemblance is superficial. One is kind, the other keeps what he takes. In the Iliad, there is a scene where the two of them are given a job together, and it is one of the tenderest things in the poem. Sarpedon, a son of Zeus, is killed at Troy, and Zeus cannot save him, and does not try to break the rule. Instead, he sends Apollo to lift the body out of the fighting, and to wash it in a river, and anoint it, and dress it in immortal clothing, and then to give it to the twin brothers, Sleep and Death, to carry swiftly home to Lycia, where his people will bury him. The most powerful being in the world cannot prevent the death of his own son, so he arranges for him to be carried home gently by two of Night's children. The dreams are a separate group, and the tradition never quite settled them. Hesiod has them as a tribe with no names. Later writers, particularly Ovid, give them individual identities and a hierarchy, with Morpheus who takes human shape, and others who appear as animals or as objects, and a cave with two gates through which true and false dreams leave, one of horn and one of ivory, an idea that goes back to the Odyssey and has been argued about ever since. The Moirai are the three who apportion, and their name means simply the shares, or the portions, the way a piece of meat or a plot of land is a share. Clotho spins the thread, Lachesis measures it and assigns the lot. Atropos, whose name means the one who cannot be turned, cuts it. The image of three women working wool is domestic and enormously old, and it appears independently across a great spread of related languages in the Norse Norns and elsewhere, which suggests it was carried rather than invented. Hesiod cannot decide whose daughters they are. In the passage we have just heard, they are children of night, born alone, out of the dark, before anything. A few hundred lines later, in the same poem, he lists them again as daughters of Zeus and Themis, alongside the seasons, which makes them junior officials of the new administration. The contradiction sits there in one poem, unresolved. It is probably two traditions welded together, and the poet did not think it worth smoothing. But the two versions say opposite things about the most important question in Greek thought. If the Fates are Night's daughters, then apportionment came before the gods, and Zeus is subject to it. If they are the daughters of Zeus and right order, then the ruler of the world sets the shares and can presumably adjust them. Homer leans toward the first. In the scene we just heard, Zeus wants to save Sarpedon, and Hera tells him that if he does it, the other gods will all want the same for their own sons, and he gives way. He is not physically prevented, he is talked out of it by an argument about precedent, which is somehow worse. That is the deepest thing this cosmogony says. The apportioning is older than the god, and the god knows it. Nemesis is retribution, and it is a mistake to hear that as punishment for wrongdoing. Her name comes from a verb meaning to distribute or to deal out what is due, and what she deals out is the correction of imbalance. Too much good fortune is her business as much as too much crime. She is the force that takes back what a person has more of than is proper, whether or not they did anything to deserve either the having or the losing. That idea is everywhere in Greek thought, and it is why the successful were expected to be nervous. A man with a run of luck was not congratulated in the way we would congratulate him. She had a real cult, which is rare in this family, and her main sanctuary was at Rhamnus in Attica, on the coast looking toward Euboea. There is a story attached to it that the Persians brought a block of marble with them in their invasion fleet, intending to carve a victory monument out of it after they had taken Athens, and that after they lost at Marathon, the Athenians used that same block to carve the statue of Nemesis at Rhamnus. It is very likely not true. Pausanias reports it several centuries after the fact, and the dating of the actual statue does not fit comfortably. But it is exactly the kind of story people wanted about her, and the fact that they wanted it tells you what she meant to them. Eris is Strife, and she is the last one Hesiod lists, and she has the most famous single action in the entire family. In Works and Days, he corrects himself about her. He says that there is not one Eris after all, but two, and that he had been wrong to speak of her as a single thing. One is the cruel one, who builds up evil war and battle, and whom nobody loves, and who is honored only under compulsion. The other, he says, is far better for men. She stirs even the shiftless to work. A man sees his neighbor prosperous, and hurries to plow and to plant, and to set his house in order, and neighbor competes with neighbor toward wealth. This Eris, he says, is good for mortals. Potter is angry with potter, and carpenter with carpenter, and beggar is jealous of beggar, and singer of singer. That is an unusually generous piece of thinking for a poem that is mostly complaints. Competition and envy, he is saying, are the same force as war, only pointed at work instead of at each other. The famous story is the other one. At the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, every god was invited except Eris, for the obvious reason. She came anyway, and she threw a golden apple among the guests with an inscription on it, which said, "To the fairest." 3 goddesses claimed it. Zeus refused to judge and sent them to a shepherd on Mount Ida, who was a prince of Troy in reduced circumstances. Each of them offered him something. He chose the one who offered him the most beautiful woman in the world, who was already married to a Greek king. 10 years of war, the deaths of Hector and Achilles and Sarpedon and Patroclus, the burning of a city, and the scattering of the survivors across the Mediterranean, all of it beginning with one uninvited guest and one piece of fruit with 4 words on it. The Greeks liked that shape. The largest thing in their literature is set in motion by the smallest and pettiest possible cause, thrown by a daughter of night who was left off a guest list. Geras is old age, and he is worth a moment because of how he is shown. He appears on a small number of vases, and always in the same scene, which is a fight with Heracles. He is drawn as a tiny, bent, shrunken figure with a stick, sometimes with the body of a very thin old man, and Heracles is threatening him with a club. It is not a real myth. There is no story anywhere of Heracles fighting old age. It seems to be a joke or a wish, and the painters kept repeating it. That is the whole surviving treatment of Geras in Greek art, a hero who cannot be beaten, swinging at a small bent figure who is going to win anyway. Several of Knight's children never acquired stories at all, and they are worth naming rather than skipping, because their bare presence in the list is the point. Aparte is deceit. She appears in a few late allegories and nowhere else. Momos is blame, or fault-finding, and he has one anecdote, which Aesop tells. The gods held a competition to see who could make the finest thing. One made a bull, one made a house, one made a man. Momos was the judge, and he criticized all 3. He said the bull's horns should have been below the eyes, so it could see where it was striking. He said the house should have been given wheels, so its owner could move away from bad neighbors. And he said the man should have had a window in his chest, so that everyone could see what he was really thinking. For that last remark, in some versions, he was thrown off Olympus. The fault finder was expelled for finding a fault that was too accurate. Oises is misery, distress. the daily grinding sort, rather than the tragic sort. The Romans called her miseria. She has no stories whatsoever. Philotes is affection, in the plain physical sense, and she is the only warm thing on the list apart from the Hesperides, and she too has nothing attached to her. They are names in a catalogue. But the catalogue is a claim, and the claim is that these are as old as the earth, that nobody introduced them, and that they were not sent as a consequence of anything anyone did. Hesiod's is not the only Greek account of how things started, and it may not even have been the most widely believed one among people who thought about it seriously. There was a body of poetry attributed to Orpheus, the singer who went into the underworld, and it circulated for something like 1,000 years, and it told a different beginning. What survives is fragments, quoted by later authors, many of them Christian writers quoting it in order to attack it, so the material comes to us through hostile hands and in pieces. In the version most often reconstructed, the first thing is not a gap. It is chronos, time, imagined as an ageless serpent with the heads of a bull and a lion and the face of a god between them, and beside him a nunque, whose name means necessity or compulsion, also serpentine, and the two of them are coiled around the whole of creation. Time and necessity, wrapped around everything, before anything exists to be constrained. Out of them comes an egg, silver in some accounts, made by time in the ether, and the egg splits, and out of it comes a god. His name is Phanes, which means the one who appears, or the one who brings to light, and he is described in the fragments as golden-winged, four-eyed, bearing the heads of several animals, both male and female at once, and shining so brightly that the light coming out of the egg was the first light there was. He carries the seeds of everything inside him. He is also called Protogonos, the firstborn, and Erikaios, a name nobody has satisfactorily explained. Then, in these accounts, Phanes gives the rule to Night, who is his daughter, and Night gives it to Oranos, and so on down the succession we already know, so that the Orphic version does not replace Hesiod so much as slide underneath him and add 3 generations before his first line. Whether ordinary Greeks believed this, or whether it was the doctrine of a small and self-consciously strange movement, is a genuine and unsettled scholarly argument. What is certain is that it was written down and copied and quoted for a very long time, and that it produced one of the few genuinely alien images in Greek religion, a four-eyed golden hermaphrodite hatching out of a silver egg made by a serpent called Time. The figure in that account worth sitting with is a nunque, necessity, compulsion, the way things have to be. She is not a lawgiver, and she does not decide anything. She is the fact that some things cannot be otherwise. Plato puts her at the center of his own picture of the cosmos. In the last book of the Republic, in the vision of he describes a spindle of light passing through the whole of heaven, turning in the lap of necessity, and the Fates are her daughters, sitting around her on thrones, singing, each of them putting a hand to the spindle to help it turn. Lachesis sings the past, Clotho the present, Atropos the future. And in that vision, the souls waiting to be born choose their own next lives, and Lachesis says to them the line that the whole passage is built around, which is that the responsibility belongs to the one who chooses, and that God is blameless. Simonides has a fragment saying that not even the gods fight against necessity. The phrase becomes proverbial. That is the highest thing in this cosmology, and it is not a person. Above Zeus, above the Titans, above night, there is the plain fact that certain things cannot be arranged differently, and it is imagined as an old woman holding a spindle while her daughters sing. There is a third version, older sounding and stranger, which a much later writer records and calls Pelasgian, meaning that he thought it belonged to the people who lived in Greece before the Greeks. In it, the first being is a goddess called Eurynome, who rises naked out of chaos and finds nothing to stand on, and so divides the sea from the sky and dances alone on the waves. Her dancing raises a wind behind her, and she takes hold of the north wind and rubs it between her hands, and out of it comes a great serpent called Ophion. Ophion, watching her dance, desires her, and they couple, and afterwards she takes the form of a dove and lays the universal egg, and Ophion coils around it 7 times until it hatches and everything tumbles out. Then they go to live on Olympus, and Ophion irritates her by claiming that he made everything himself, and she kicks his teeth out and throws him into the caves under the earth. The account we have of this comes from Robert Graves in the middle of the 20th century, assembled out of scattered ancient references, and classicists have been skeptical of how much of it is genuinely ancient and how much is Graves. Ophion and Eurynome do appear in real fragments as a pair who ruled before Kronos and were thrown down into Okeanos. The dancing and the doves and the teeth are much less secure. It is included tonight not as evidence, but because it shows how much room there was. There was no orthodoxy. A Greek could believe that everything began with a gap, or with an egg, or with a woman dancing on water because there was nowhere to stand. It is worth stepping outside Greece for a moment, because the oldest layer of this material is not Greek at all, and the resemblances are not subtle. In the Babylonian poem that begins Enuma Elish, when on high, the opening lines describe a time when the heavens had not been named, and the earth below had not been called by name, and there was nothing but Apsu, the fresh water, and Tiamat, the salt sea, mingling their waters together. From that mingling the gods are born, and they are noisy, and the older powers try to destroy them for it, and a young storm god eventually kills the mother and makes the world out of her body. In the Hebrew opening, the earth is without form and void, and darkness is upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit moves upon the face of the waters. The word translated as the deep, Tehom, is philologically related to the name Tiamat. In the Rig Veda, there is a hymn, usually called the Nasadiya, which is the least like the others and the most extraordinary. It says that then there was neither existence nor non-existence, neither air nor sky beyond. It asks what covered it, and where, and in whose keeping. It says, there was neither death nor immortality then, and no sign of night or day, and that the one breathed windlessly by its own impulse. And then it ends with a question, which is almost unheard of in a creation account. It says that whence this creation arose, and whether it was made or not, only the overseer of it in the highest heaven knows, or perhaps he does not know. 4 traditions, all reaching for the same moment. 3 of them answer. One of them says that possibly nobody knows, including God. The Greek answer, that first there was room, sits closer to the Indian one than to the Babylonian, and it has the same quality of restraint. Hesiod does not say what made the gap. He does not appear to think it is a question that can be asked. Gaia is the only one of the first beings who kept a real religious life, and she kept it for a very long time. She is the ground you are lying on. That is not a metaphor in this system. When a Greek swore the most serious kind of oath, he swore by earth and by sky, and by the water of the underground river, and the earth being sworn by was her. Offerings to her were poured rather than burned. The distinction mattered enormously. Sacrifices to the sky gods went up as smoke on a raised altar, and the animal's throat was lifted. Offerings to the powers below went down, poured into a pit or straight onto the ground, and the animal's head was pushed toward the earth. She received the second kind. She had an oracle at Delphi before Apollo, and the tradition is consistent about this, even though it is an awkward admission for the Apollo priesthood to have preserved. Aeschylus gives the order plainly, that first of the gods the oracle honored Earth, and then Themis, and then Phoebe, and then Apollo. There was said to be a chasm and a vapor, and a woman who sat above it. She is also the one who keeps intervening. It is Gaia who gives Kronos the sickle and the plan. It is Gaia who tells Rhea where to hide the child. It is Gaia who tells Zeus that he cannot win the war without releasing the prisoners. And it is Gaia, in the end, who produces Typhon against Zeus when she is angry about what happened to her other children. Every generation of rulers in this story is put in power by her and then eventually opposed by her. She is not on anyone's side. She is the ground, and the ground outlasts administrations. Her name went outward in the 20th century in an unexpected direction. In the 1970s, a chemist named James Lovelock, working on ways to detect life on other planets, proposed that the Earth's atmosphere and oceans and living things behave as a single, self-regulating system. He needed a name for it. His neighbor in the village where he lived was the novelist William Golding, who suggested Gaia. The hypothesis has been argued over ever since, and the name has been both an advantage and a burden to it, because it made the idea sound mystical when the actual claim was about chemistry. We have already been down into Tartaros as a location, so tonight let us take him only as a person, because Hesiod lists him among the first 4 beings, and that is a strange thing to do with a prison. He is named in the same breath as the gap and the earth and desire, before anything is born, before there is anyone to imprison. So in the oldest layer, he is not a punishment at all. He is simply the underneath, the fact that below the ground there is further down. And because he is a being, he can have children, and he does. With Gaia, he fathers Typhon, the last and worst thing that ever rises against Zeus, a 100-headed storm that nearly wins. That is the logic of this cosmology working itself out. Earth and underneath, the top surface and the bottom depth, produce between them the one force that almost undoes the entire settlement. Eros is the most confusing figure in this family because there are 2 of him and the Greeks knew it. The first is the one in Hesiod, in the opening list. He is one of the first beings, older than the gods, older than the Titans, with no parents at all. He is not a boy. He is not carrying anything. He is the principle by which separate things join, and he has to exist before anything can be produced by anything else. The second is the one everybody pictures. A young son of Aphrodite, mischievous, armed with a bow, causing trouble by making the wrong people fall in love. That version is much later and belongs to Hellenistic poetry, and it is the one the Romans took as Cupid, and the one that shrinks over the centuries into a plump infant on a greetings card. Plato is explicit about the older sense. In the Symposium, the speakers argue about which Eros they are talking about, and one of them says directly that Eros is among the most ancient of the gods and has no parents, and quotes Hesiod to prove it. And in Diotima's speech, Eros is not a god at all, but a spirit in between, the child of resource and poverty, always in want, always seeking, permanently unsatisfied and permanently reaching. That is much closer to a cosmological force than to a cherub. So the same word covers the thing that makes the universe assemble itself and the thing that makes a shepherd fall for the wrong girl. The Greeks did not consider that a contradiction. They thought it was one force at two scales. Ether and Hemera, the two children of darkness and night, deserve a moment, even though almost nothing is said about either. Ether is the upper air, and the distinction between it and ordinary air was taken seriously for 2,000 years. The lower air is what we breathe, damp and mixed and full of weather. The ether above it is thin, bright, pure, and unchanging, and it is what the gods breathe and what the stars move in. Aristotle made it a fifth element, alongside earth, water, air, and fire, and gave it the property of moving naturally in circles, which is why the heavens turn. That fifth element, the quintessence, stayed in physics until the 17th century and stayed in the language after that. When 19th century physicists needed a medium for light to travel through, they called it the luminiferous ether and looked for it and did not find it, and the experiment that failed to find it is one of the roads to relativity. Hemera is day, and she has a problem, which is that Eos is dawn, and the two of them overlap so much that later writers simply merged them. Hesiod keeps them separate. Day is night's daughter, and they pass each other at the threshold of their house. Eos is a Titan's daughter, and drives a chariot, and has love affairs. By the Roman period, the distinction had mostly collapsed, and Hemera had been absorbed into Aurora. She is one of the very few figures in Greek myth who was lost, not by being forgotten, but by being merged into somebody more interesting. We began with the word chaos, meaning an opening, and Ovid turning it into a churning heap. The word kept moving after that, and where it ended up is worth following. Through the medieval and early modern period, it stayed close to Ovid. Chaos was the unformed matter before creation, the raw material, and it appears that way in Milton, who gives it a personified ruler and makes it a region Satan has to cross, a dark, illimitable ocean without bound. Then, in ordinary English, it slid downward into simply meaning a great disorder, a room in chaos, a schedule in chaos. And then, in the second half of the 20th century, it was picked up by mathematicians and given a meaning that is almost the opposite of the everyday one. In 1963, a meteorologist named Edward Lorenz was running a simplified weather simulation and restarted a calculation halfway through, typing in a number from a printout that had been rounded to 3 decimal places instead of the 6 the machine was holding. The weather the model produced diverged completely from the first run. A difference of 1 part in 1,000 had become a different month. The term chaos, in that mathematical sense, means a system that is entirely deterministic, governed by fixed rules with no randomness in it at all, and yet unpredictable in practice because arbitrarily small differences in the starting state grow without limit. That is a very precise idea, and it has nothing to do with disorder. A chaotic system is not messy. It is lawful, and it is simply beyond our ability to specify. So the word has gone gap, then heap, then mess, then a technical term for order that cannot be predicted. Hesiod would not recognize any of the later ones, though he might have liked the last, which after all is a statement about a limit on what can be known. Erebos, the darkness that night lay with, went to sea. In 1826, the Royal Navy launched a bomb vessel, a heavily built ship designed to carry mortars, and named her HMS Erebus. A sister type, HMS Terror, was already in service. They were slow, immensely strong ships, and that strength made them useful for something other than war. In the 1830s and 40s, the two of them went south together under James Clark Ross and spent 4 years in Antarctic waters, further south than anyone had been. Ross found a great ice barrier and a volcano on an island, smoking, and he named the volcano Mount Erebus after his ship, and a second peak beside it, Mount Terror. Mount Erebus is still there, and it is still active. It is one of the very few volcanoes on Earth with a persistent lava lake, a body of molten rock open to the air, on an island of ice, in a place where the sun does not rise for 4 months. Then in 1845, the same 2 ships were fitted with steam engines and iron plating and sent north instead to find a passage through the Arctic under Sir John Franklin, 129 men. They were seen by whalers in Baffin Bay in July of that year and never seen again by anyone who came home. What followed was one of the largest search efforts of the century. Over the next decades, the searchers pieced together fragments. A note left under a cairn recording that the ships had been beset by ice for 1.5 years and abandoned, and that Franklin was dead. Testimony from Inuit who had met the last survivors walking south. Bones, later, with marks on them that told a story nobody wanted to publish at the time. The ships themselves were not found for another 170 years. Erebus was located in 2014 and Terror in 2016, both in shallow water, both largely intact, found in the areas that Inuit oral testimony had been indicating all along. A ship named after primordial darkness went into the ice and stayed lost for 170 years, and then was found where the local people had always said it was. Eris, the daughter of Night who threw the apple, got a planet, and the manner of it is the best joke in modern astronomy. In January of 2005, a team at Palomar found an object in the outer solar system on images taken 2 years earlier. It was far beyond Neptune, in a very tilted orbit, and when they measured it, it appeared to be larger than Pluto. That created a genuine problem. If it was bigger than Pluto and Pluto was a planet, then this was the 10th planet. And if it was not a planet, then it was hard to see how Pluto could be one either, since a great many similar objects were clearly out there waiting to be found. The astronomers argued about it for a year and a half. The International Astronomical Union met in Prague in August of 2006 and voted on a definition of the word planet. And under the definition they adopted, both objects failed the same clause, and Pluto was reclassified. The new object needed a name. The discovery team had been calling it Xena informally. When the time came to submit a real name, they chose Eris, the goddess of strife and discord, because the object had caused an enormous argument among astronomers and had cost Pluto its status. Its one moon is called Dysnomia, which in Hesiod is a daughter of Eris and means lawlessness, and which is also a private joke, since the actress who played Xena was named Lawless. So a body at the edge of the solar system is named after the daughter of Night, whose entire function is to cause disputes, because its discovery caused a dispute, and it is orbited by a small moon named Lawlessness. Eris is currently about 96 times as far from the Sun as the Earth is. It takes 558 years to go round once. Its surface is thought to be nitrogen ice, and when it comes closer to the Sun, that ice may thin into a temporary atmosphere and then freeze back onto the ground as it moves away. Somewhere out there, a very cold and very distant thing named after discord is quietly making and unmaking its own air. The last of them left their names inside ordinary technical vocabulary, where nobody notices them. Hypnos gave his name to hypnosis, though not directly. In the 1840s, a Scottish surgeon named James Braid, working in Manchester, was trying to separate the real phenomenon he was observing from the theatrical business of animal magnetism, and he wanted a word that did not carry that baggage. He coined neurohypnotism, from the Greek for sleep, and it shortened to hypnotism. He later thought the name was a mistake because the state is not sleep, and tried to replace it with monoideism. Nobody adopted the replacement. Thanatos gave his name to euthanasia, which is simply good death, and to thanatology, and then to something stranger. In 1920, Freud published Beyond the Pleasure Principle and proposed a drive toward death and dissolution set against the drive toward life. He himself did not use the word thanatos in his published writing. It was applied by a colleague, and it stuck, and it is now the standard label for the idea in every language that discusses it. Nemesis went into English as a plain noun, meaning an inescapable opponent or downfall, and it kept the sense of something deserved. The Moirai became the parquet in Rome, and then simply the fates, and the phrase to spin a yarn, meaning to tell a long story, comes from the same very old association between making thread and telling a life. None of these words carries any memory of a family, but the pattern underneath them is intact. When a language needs a word for the inevitable, it still reaches for a child of night. About a century after Hesiod, in the Greek cities on the coast of what is now Turkey, a small number of people began giving a different kind of answer to the same question, and it is usually treated as the beginning of philosophy and of science together. The first of them was Thales of Miletus, and his answer was water. Everything is made of it, and the earth floats on it. That sounds naive until you notice what he did not say. He did not say that a god made it, or that it came out of a gap, or that anything was born. He proposed a single substance and left the gods out entirely. And once you have done that, somebody can disagree with you on the merits. His successor, Anaximander, from the same city, made the more remarkable move. He said the first thing could not be any of the ordinary substances, because if the source were water, then water would have overwhelmed everything long ago, and the same for fire and for the rest. Whatever is first has to be something with no particular character of its own, from which all the definite things can come. He called it the apeiron, which means the unbounded, or the unlimited, or the indefinite. That is Hesiod's gap, thought through and made rigorous. Not a substance, not a place, not a god, simply the unlimited from which limits come. There is one surviving fragment of him, quoted at second hand, and it is the oldest sentence in European philosophy. He says that the things that exist perish into those things out of which they have their being, according to necessity, for they pay penalty and retribution to one another for their injustice, according to the ordering of time. Read that slowly. He is describing the physical world, the endless exchange in which one thing rises at the expense of another, and he is using the vocabulary of a lawsuit. Necessity, penalty, retribution, and the ordering of time. Those are Ananke and Nemesis and the Moirai. The first philosopher of nature, trying to remove the gods from the account, reaches for the exact words of Night's children to describe how matter behaves. The most direct case of that is Empedocles, working in Sicily a century later. He proposed 4 roots, which we would call elements, being earth, air, fire, and water, and he said that these are eternal and that nothing is ever really created or destroyed. What changes is how they are arranged. And he said that there are 2 forces that do the arranging, and only 2, and they act on everything, always in opposition. One he called Philotes, which is love or affection, and its effect is to bring unlike things together into combinations. The other he called Nakos, strife, and its effect is to separate them again into their own kinds. The cosmos, in his account, moves through an endless cycle. When love is complete, everything is mixed into a single, undifferentiated sphere. When strife is complete, the 4 roots are entirely separated. Everything we can see, including us, exists only in the transitions between those 2 extremes. Look at what he has done with the material. Philotes and Eris are both in Hesiod's list of the children of night, sitting 3 lines apart, along with deceit and old age and misery. Empedocles takes those 2 out of that catalogue of hardships and makes them the 2 fundamental forces of the universe. It is the same move that a physicist makes when reducing everything to attraction and repulsion, and he made it by promoting 2 of Night's daughters. Whether he thought of it that way is not recorded, but the vocabulary did not come from nowhere. He was raised on the poem. It is worth returning, before we finish, to the man on the hillside, because he tells us where he got all of this, and the passage is peculiar. Hesiod says that the Muses taught him song while he was keeping sheep under holy Helicon. He says they came to him and spoke to him first, and what they said was rude. They called him and the others like him shepherds of the wilderness, wretched things of shame, mere bellies. And then they said something that has been argued about ever since. They said that they know how to speak many false things as though they were true, and that they know, when they wish, how to utter true things. Then they gave him a staff of laurel and breathed a divine voice into him, so that he might sing of what will be and what was before, and told him to sing of the race of the blessed gods, and always to sing of themselves first and last. That is an extraordinary thing to put at the front of a poem about the origin of the world. The authorities are announcing, before they say anything else, that they are capable of lying convincingly, and that telling the truth is optional and depends on their mood. Homer's muses are not like this. They are simply asked for the facts because they were present and the poet was not. Nobody has fully explained why Hesiod includes it. The readings offered are that he is distinguishing his own true account from the false ones told by other poets, or that he is being genuinely modest about the limits of what a human can know about the beginning of everything, or that he is making a claim about poetry itself, which is that it works by making things that are not literally true carry something that is. Whichever it is, the oldest surviving account of the origin of the universe opens with a warning about its own reliability, delivered by its own sources. There is a practical question hiding underneath all of this, which is why we have any of it at all. The theogony survived because it was copied, by hand, continuously, for something like 2,300 years, by people who each had to decide it was worth the parchment. It was copied in antiquity because it was used in schools. It survived the end of the Western Empire because it was in the libraries of the Greek East. It was copied in Constantinople by Byzantine scholars who were, by then, reading it as a strange old text from a religion nobody practiced. And when Constantinople fell, in the 15th century, scholars carried manuscripts west into Italy, where they were printed. The oldest complete manuscripts we have are medieval, roughly 2,000 years younger than the poem. There are fragments on papyrus from Egypt that are older, and quotations in other authors that are older still, and the work of putting them together and deciding what Hesiod actually wrote is called textual criticism, and it is still going on. So the sequence is this. Something was sung on a hillside in Boeotia. It was written down. It was taught to children for 1,000 years. It was preserved by a Christian empire that did not believe a word of it. It was carried out of a burning city in a bag, and it was printed and translated and is being read aloud tonight in a language that did not exist when any of that happened. The list of Night's children is a piece of information that has been passed hand to hand for 100 generations without ever once being necessary. Among all those children of night, there is a single kind entry, and it does not belong there at all, and nobody knows why it is. The Hesperides are the daughters of evening. 3 of them, or 4 or 7 depending on the source, living at the western edge of the world, beyond the stream of Okeanos, in a garden, tending a tree of golden apples with a dragon that never sleeps coiled around it. That is the whole of them. They sing, they garden, and they are visited exactly twice in the whole of mythology, once by Heracles and once by Perseus. Hesiod puts them in the middle of the list, between misery and the fates. Other authors, apparently uncomfortable with this, reassign them to Atlas, or to Night and Erebos together, or to Phorcys. There is a reading that makes sense of it. The Hesperides are the evening. They are what happens in the west at the end of the day, when the light goes gold. And gold apples on a tree at the western edge of the world, guarded so that nobody can take them, is a very exact description of what a sunset looks like from a beach. If that is right, then the one beautiful thing among the children of night is beautiful for the same reason as everything else in the list. It is simply an accurate description of a thing that happens whether anyone wants it to or not. If you go looking for temples to these figures, you will not find them, with a small number of instructive exceptions. Nobody built a sanctuary to chaos. There was no priesthood of Erebos. Nyx, for all that Zeus was careful of her, had almost no public cult in the Greek cities, and what she had was mostly oracular and nocturnal and small. There was said to be an oracle of night at Megara. That is close to the whole record. Gaia is the exception, and we have already heard why. Nemesis is the other, at Rhamnus. But there is a third kind of evidence, and it is unlike the rest, and it comes out of graves. Beginning in the 4th century before the Common Era, in southern Italy and Crete and Thessaly, archaeologists have found thin sheets of gold, no bigger than a hand, folded up and placed with the dead. There are around 40 of them known. They carry short texts in Greek verse, and the texts are instructions. They tell the dead person what they are going to see and what to say. They describe a spring on the left with a white cypress beside it, and tell the soul not to go near it. They describe another spring further on, of cold water flowing from the lake of memory, with guardians in front of it, and they give the words to use. The soul is to say that it is a child of earth and of starry sky, that it is parched with thirst and perishing, and to ask for cold water from the lake of memory. Some of the tablets add a line for the guardians to reply with, granting the request. That is the only place in this entire subject where the primordial beings turn up in the life of an actual person, not in a temple, folded into gold, put into a grave, so that the dead would be able to say the correct thing. And what they were told to say is a claim of descent from the two oldest beings in the poem, Earth and Sky, not from Zeus and not from any Olympian. When it finally mattered, when a Greek believed he was standing in the dark in front of something that would decide, the answer he was taught to give reached all the way back past the gods to the beginning. It would be dishonest to spend a night on the question of what was there first without saying what the current answer is, and the current answer has an interesting shape. Cosmology can describe the universe with great precision back to a very small fraction of a second after it began, and the description is well tested. Beyond that, at the point everything is traced back to, the equations stop returning meaningful values. That point is not an explosion in space, and it is not a moment when something appeared in an empty room. It is where the description runs out. Several serious proposals exist for what, if anything, lies on the other side of that, and they are genuinely proposals rather than established results, and the people working on them will tell you so. What is worth noticing tonight is not the physics but the grammar. The question "what was there before" is a question with a word for time inside it. And if time itself begins at that boundary, then the question may not have a meaning, in the same way that asking what lies north of the North Pole does not have a meaning. Which brings us round, oddly, to where we started. Hesiod's word was not a substance. It was a gap, an opening, room for things. He does not say what made it, and he does not appear to think there is anyone to ask. He begins with the fact that there is somewhere for things to be, and takes that as the first fact, rather than as a problem. That is not science, and it should not be dressed up as science. But it is the same instinct as the Vedic hymn that ends by wondering whether even the highest God knows, and it is a good deal more careful than the versions that came after it and were more confident. So, before the light goes out, the thing worth carrying away from tonight. The Greeks put doom, violent death, sleep, dreams, blame, misery, fate, retribution, deceit, affection, old age and discord into a single family, born from one mother, without a father, before the world was organized, and before there was anybody they could happen to. They did not say these things were sent. They did not say they were deserved. They did not say a god was angry, or that a rule had been broken, or that anyone was being tested. They are simply older than everything, including the gods, and they were there first. That is a colder account than most religions offer, and it is also kinder than it sounds. If misery and old age were arranged as punishment, then a person suffering them would have to look for what they had done. In this version, there is nothing to look for. Night had children, and among them are the hard parts of being alive, and they arrived before anyone did. And the same mother, in the same sentence without pausing, gave birth to sleep and to dreams, and to the daughters of evening who keep a garden of golden apples at the western edge of the world. The Greeks did not separate those two groups. They did not put the good ones in a different family. Sleep and death are brothers who look alike and live in the same house. The golden garden is on the same list as misery. Day is the daughter of night. Nothing in this cosmology is the enemy of anything else. Everything is the child of what came before it, including the things that look like opposites, and the whole arrangement precedes anyone's opinion about it. There is a habit at work in all of this that is worth naming, because it is not universal, and the Greeks did it more than almost anyone. They turned abstractions into persons, not into symbols or allegories, but into beings, with parents, with genealogies, and occasionally with altars. Fear and panic ride with the war god as his sons. Victory is a winged woman who stands beside Zeus. Rumor has wings and a great many eyes. Persuasion, health, peace, justice, modesty, good order, lawlessness, and wealth all appear in poetry as figures with families. The technical word for it is personification, and in Greek it goes much further than a figure of speech. When Hesiod says that night bore old age, he is not decorating an idea. He is putting old age into the family tree in the same way and with the same verb that he uses for putting Zeus into it. Why they did this so heavily is genuinely disputed. One argument is that it is a habit of the language, since Greek abstract nouns carry grammatical gender, and it is a very short step from a feminine noun to a female figure. Another is that it is how an oral culture organizes knowledge. A genealogy is a memorable structure, and if you want to say that deceit and strife and doom belong together and are related to death, the most memorable way to say it is that they are siblings. And there is a third possibility, which is that they meant it more literally than we find comfortable, that old age was experienced as something that arrives from outside and takes hold, rather than as a process happening inside the body. Read the list again with that in mind, and it changes character. It stops being a poem about ideas and becomes a list of visitors. The keres are in the list twice, and they are worth separating out, because they are not the fates, and the two are constantly confused. The moirai apportion. They are impersonal, they deal in shares, and they are usually described calmly. The keres are the violent death that comes to a specific person at a specific moment. They are described as dark, with white teeth, with claws, dressed in red from the wounds of the men they take, dragging bodies by the feet across a battlefield and fighting each other over them. In the Iliad, at the moment when Achilles and Hector are about to fight for the last time, Zeus takes up his golden scales and puts into them 2 keres, one for each man, and lifts the balance, and Hector's sinks down toward the house of the dead, and Apollo leaves him. That is a physical thing in a physical pair of scales, and it is done by the king of the gods, and once it is done, he does not intervene. He weighs, he sees the result, and he accepts it. There is also a phrase used of a person's own death, care, singular, as though everyone has one that belongs to them and is waiting. Achilles is told he has 2 available and may choose between a long, obscure life and a short, famous one, which is the only time in the poem that anyone gets a say. The dreams were the vaguest of night's children in Hesiod, and they became the most elaborated later, and the reason is one image in the Odyssey that nobody has ever been able to leave alone. Penelope, near the end, describes a dream she has had and says she does not know whether to believe it, and she explains why with a piece of folk wisdom about how dreams arrive. She says that dreams come through 2 gates. Those that come through the gate of sawn ivory deceive, carrying words that are not fulfilled. Those that come through the gate of polished horn bring true things to pass for the person who sees them. There is a pun underneath it in Greek that does not survive translation. The word for ivory resembles the verb meaning to deceive, and the word for horn resembles the verb meaning to fulfill. Virgil borrowed the image and made it stranger. At the end of the 6th book of the Aeneid, Aeneas has been through the underworld and been shown the entire future of Rome, and he leaves. And Virgil sends him out through the ivory gate, which is the gate of false dreams. Scholars have been arguing about that choice for 2,000 years, and there is no agreed answer. It is one line, and it appears to unsay the whole vision. Ovid gave the dreams names and a house. Somnus, sleep, lies in a cave where no cock crows and no dog barks and no branch moves, with the river of forgetting running through it and poppies growing at the door. His sons are Morpheus, who can take any human shape and imitate the voice and walk of a particular person, Aiselos, who becomes animals, and Phantasos, who becomes objects, earth and rock and water and wood. Morpheus got the longest afterlife. In 1811, a German pharmacist isolated the active compound in opium and named it after him because of what it does. 2 smaller afterlives, and then we can let the list go. In Florence, in the new sacristy of San Lorenzo, Michelangelo carved 4 figures for the Medici tombs, representing the times of day, and one of them is night. She is a reclining woman, asleep, twisted uncomfortably, with a crescent moon and a star in her hair, an owl under her bent knee, and a mask beside her. A poet of the time wrote a verse in praise of her, saying that since she was made by an angel out of stone, she must be alive, and that if you do not believe it, wake her, and she will speak. Michelangelo wrote a reply in the voice of the statue, and it is 4 lines long, and it is the most famous thing he ever wrote. She says that sleep is dear to her, and being made of stone is dearer, while harm and shame endure. Not to see and not to hear is a great fortune to her. Therefore, do not wake her. And she asks him to speak softly. That was written in Florence in the 1530s by a man watching his republic fall, using night as the only figure available who could reasonably say that being unconscious is preferable. And the name went up as well, though modestly. There is an asteroid called Nix, and when a small moon of Pluto was found in 2005, it was named Nix in the Egyptian-influenced spelling, because the international rules would not permit a name that duplicated the asteroid. So night circles the god of the dead at the edge of the solar system, with her name deliberately misspelled to avoid a clash. There is one more body of text, and it is the closest thing we have to hearing these figures addressed out loud. The Orphic hymns are a collection of 87 short poems, each to a different divine power. And they are not literary, they are functional. Each one names the recipient, piles up their titles, specifies the incense to be burned, and asks for something. They were used by somebody in an actual rite, probably in Asia Minor, probably in the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era. The order of them is itself informative. After a preface, the first hymns are to the powers a Greek would consider oldest, and the third is to Night. It calls her the mother of gods and men, and the origin of all things, and says that she is the one from whom everything came into being. It asks her, kindly, to drive away the fears that come in the dark. The incense specified for her is torches. There is a hymn to Ether, and one to Protogonos, the firstborn, who is Phanes, described as double-natured, wandering through the sky on golden wings, bull-roarer, glorious seed, source of the blessed. There is a hymn to the stars, and one to the Moirai, which asks them, since they are the only ones who can, to come gently. Whoever these people were, they were burning incense to night and to the firstborn and to necessity on a schedule and asking politely. That is not the same thing as a temple, and it is very late in the story, more than 800 years after Hesiod. But it is evidence that somebody, somewhere, kept the oldest names in active use, addressed them directly, and expected an answer. Related to that, and much older, are the mystery cults, and they matter here because they are the only part of Greek religion that made a promise about death. Ordinary Greek religion did not. The Homeric underworld is a grey place where the dead persist without much of themselves, and Achilles, when Odysseus meets him there, says that he would rather be a hired labourer on the land of a poor man than king over all the perished dead. That is the standard picture, and it is not comforting. The mysteries offered something else. At Eleusis, near Athens, for something close to 2,000 years, initiates went through a rite once, at night, and were forbidden to describe it. The secrecy held remarkably well, which is itself extraordinary, and the result is that we know a great deal about the arrangements and almost nothing about the content. What we do know is what was claimed for it. Several sources say that those who had seen the rites had a better hope concerning the end of life. One says plainly that the initiate goes to the house of the dead knowing something the others do not. The gold tablets we heard about earlier come from a related world. So does the instruction not to drink from the first spring. None of that involves the Olympians in any central way. The material reaches past them to the powers that were there first, to earth and to memory and to night, and to the question of what happens in the dark, which is the one question the official religion did not answer. Phanes, the four-eyed golden being who hatched out of the silver egg, is almost entirely a literary figure, quoted in fragments, and for a long time nobody could point to an image of him. Then, in the 1890s, during building work in Modena in northern Italy, a marble relief came out of the ground. It shows a naked winged youth standing inside an oval, and around the oval is a serpent coiled. He has the heads of animals emerging from his body, a goat and a lion and a ram. His feet are cloven. He holds a staff and a thunderbolt. Around the whole thing runs a band with the signs of the zodiac, and in the corners are the four winds. It matches the descriptions of Phanes in the Orphic fragments closely enough that most scholars accept the identification, though it has been questioned, and the dating is uncertain, probably 2nd century of the Common Era. It sat in a museum in Modena, being mostly ignored for a long time. It is one piece of carved stone, and as far as anyone knows, it is the only surviving image of the being that a whole strand of Greek religion held to be the first thing that ever appeared. An entire cosmology, and one relief, found by accident during construction in a town in Emilia. One last confusion to clear up, because it is nearly universal and it is worth having straight in the dark. Thanatos is death. Hades is not. Hades is the ruler of the place the dead go, and he is an Olympian by birth, a son of Kronos and Rhea, brother of Zeus and Poseidon. He administers. He does not come for anyone, and he does not kill anyone. In the whole of Greek literature, he leaves his kingdom on his own initiative essentially once, and that is to carry off Persephone. Thanatos is the son of Night, no relation, older, and he is the one who arrives. The Greeks were consistent about this, and later tradition was not. Every subsequent culture that borrowed the material collapsed the two, so that the Lord of the Underworld became the figure who comes for you, and the hooded reaper of medieval Europe carries the sickle that really belongs to a titan and does the job that belongs to a child of night, while wearing the office of an Olympian bureaucrat. Three separate figures flattened into one, and the one we ended up with does not correspond to any of them. The word we began with had one more life before it became a mathematical term, and it is worth a moment because a great English poem turned it back into a person. Milton, writing Paradise Lost in the 1660s, blind, dictating to whoever was available, needed somewhere for Satan to travel through between hell and the newly made world. He put chaos there, and he made it a place and a ruler at once. He describes it as a dark, illimitable ocean, without bound, without dimension, where length and breadth and height and time and place are lost. He calls it the womb of nature, and perhaps her grave, and he gives it a throne, on which sits an ancient figure named Chaos, with night beside him, described as the eldest of things. Satan crosses it with enormous difficulty, half flying and half falling, and when he asks the way, the old king gives him directions and complains, because every world that gets made is territory taken out of his kingdom. That is a very long way from a Boeotian shepherd saying that first of all there came to be a gap. Milton has turned the absence of anything into a resentful old man who dislikes creation on territorial grounds. But he is closer to Hesiod than Ovid was in one respect. In Milton, chaos and night are a pair, ruling together, the eldest of things, and that pairing is rite. In the original, they are not the same, but they are the first two out of the same emptiness. There is a formal point worth making about the passage we spent so long on, because it explains why it feels different from everything around it. Greek poetry of this period is full of catalogues. The Iliad has the catalogue of ships, a list of contingents and captains that runs for hundreds of lines. Hesiod has the catalogue of the Nereids and of the rivers and of the children of night. To a modern reader, a list looks like a gap in the storytelling. To an oral culture, it is the opposite. A list is the most compressed form of knowledge available. It is easy to check, it is easy to teach, and it is very hard to corrupt, because leaving something out is noticeable in a way that changing a description is not. When Hesiod lists Night's children, he is not padding. He is doing the most technically demanding thing in the poem, holding a specific set of relationships in a fixed order so that it can be transmitted without loss. And it worked. That list has come down to us intact, in order, across 100 generations, in a form we can still check against other sources. The story about Eris and the apple, by contrast, is not in Hesiod at all. It arrives much later, and it varies, and each teller adjusts it. The catalogue is the part that survived unaltered. The narrative is the part that drifted. Before the naming, one last thought, offered gently and then let go. Most religious systems that address suffering explain it. Somebody broke a rule, or is being tested, or is working off a debt from a previous life, or is being shaped for something. The explanation may be harsh, but it is an explanation, and it means the suffering is addressed to the sufferer. This one does not do that. Night had children before the world was arranged, before there was anyone at all, and among them are doom and violent death and misery and old age and strife. Nobody sent them. They are not aimed. They were here first, and everything that came later, including the gods, arrived into a universe that already contained them. That is a bleak thing to be told, and the Greeks were not sentimental about it, but there is a quiet mercy in it as well, and it is the reason this material is worth an entire night. If old age and misery are not punishments, then a person lying awake with either of them has nothing to search for. There is no fault to locate, no lesson to extract, no debt being collected. The thing that has arrived is simply older than everyone, and it came to the first people, and it will come to the last, and it is not about anybody in particular. And the same mother, in the same breath, gave birth to sleep, and to dreams, and to the daughters of the evening, who keep a garden of golden apples where the sun goes down. It helps with all of this to remember what these people meant by night, because it was not what we mean. There was no useful artificial light. An oil lamp of the ordinary kind gives out roughly the light of a single candle, and it needs tending, and the oil costs money, and the smell is not pleasant. Most households did not sit up. When the light went, the day ended. Outside, on a night without a moon, it was genuinely dark in a way that is now difficult to arrange. Travel stopped. The roads were not safe and were not lit. Cities had no street lighting at all until much later, and a person moving through Athens after dark carried a torch or went with someone who did, and if they did not, that fact was worth mentioning in court. So night was not an atmosphere or a mood. She was a condition that arrived every evening and shut everything down, reliably, and under which a set of specific things happened. Sleep, dreams, death, which comes disproportionately in the small hours and always has. Deception, which prefers the dark. Affection, likewise. Fear. Read the list of her children again with that in mind, and it stops being a philosophical catalogue and becomes almost an observation. These are the things that occur between sunset and dawn, and the two children she had with darkness, the bright upper air and the daylight, are what is waiting on the other side of it. There is one more practical detail that has come out of the study of pre-industrial sleep, and it is relevant to anyone listening to this at an odd hour. Historical records from before widespread artificial light describe sleep in two parts. People went down not long after dark, slept for several hours, woke for an hour or so in the middle of the night, and then slept again until morning. The waking period was normal, expected, and not treated as a problem. People prayed, talked quietly, tended the fire, or simply lay there. Whether that pattern was universal is debated, and the evidence is stronger for Northern Europe in the early modern period than for the ancient Mediterranean. But the general point stands, and it is worth hearing if you are awake now and were not planning to be. Waking in the dark has not always been a fault. For most of the history of our species, it was simply part of the night, and the people it happened to did not lie there wondering what was wrong with them. They knew what the middle of the night was. It had a name and a mother and a long list of brothers and sisters. There is a companion to the word chaos that traveled in the opposite direction, and the pair of them together tell the whole story of how the Greeks thought. The word is kosmos, and in ordinary early Greek, it does not mean the universe. It means order, arrangement, the proper placing of things. It is used of an army drawn up correctly, of a well-run household, of a speech that is properly constructed. It also means adornment. A woman's jewelry is her cosmos, the thing that arranges and sets her off, and that sense comes down to us intact in the word cosmetic. The philosophers took it. The tradition credits Pythagoras, though the attribution is late and shaky, with being the first to apply the word to the whole of everything, on the grounds that the whole of everything is arranged, and that its arrangement is beautiful and can be described in numbers. So the Greeks ended up with two words for the same object: chaos, which began as an opening and drifted into meaning a mess, and cosmos, which began as good housekeeping and jewelry and rose to mean the entire universe. One word fell and the other climbed, and between them they still carry the two things a person can say about everything that exists: that it is a shambles or that it is beautifully arranged, depending on the hour and the mood and how much of it you can see from where you are lying. The first Greek prose book ever written was about this, and it has a robe in it. Its author was Pherecydes of Syros, working in the 6th century before the Common Era on a small Aegean island. Everything before him that we know of was in verse. He wrote in prose, deliberately, apparently as a new thing, and what he chose to write about was the beginning of the world. The book is lost. What survives is quotations, and one papyrus fragment found in Egypt, and it is enough to show that it was very strange. He begins with three beings who always were and who were never born: Zas, which is a form of the name Zeus; Kronos, time; and Chthoni, whose name means something like the earthy one, the underground. Kronos makes fire and wind and water out of his own seed. Zas builds. And then there is a wedding, and this is the part that survives best. Zas is going to marry Chthoni, and for the wedding he makes a robe. He weaves it himself, large and beautiful, and on it he embroiders the earth and Ogenos, which is his name for the world-encircling ocean, and the dwellings of Ogenos. Then he spreads the robe over a winged oak, and when Chthoni receives the robe, she becomes Gei, which is the ordinary word for earth, the earth we walk on. So in this account, the world is not made out of a body, and it does not hatch, and it does not come out of a gap. It is a piece of embroidery, made as a gift, thrown over a tree, and the ground we stand on is a goddess wearing it. Nobody knows what the winged oak means. It has been read as an axis, as a world tree of the kind found in northern traditions, and as an image of the earth, held up in the air by something living. The fragment does not explain, and no ancient author who quotes it seems to know either. Aristotle mentions Pherecydes and says, a little dismissively, that he did not express everything in mythical terms, which in Aristotle's vocabulary is faint praise, meaning he was halfway to being a philosopher. He is also said, by later and less reliable writers, to have been the teacher of Pythagoras and to have predicted an earthquake from the taste of water drawn from a well. What matters for tonight is the shape of what he chose. Given a blank page, in a new medium, at the very beginning of European prose, the first thing anybody wrote about was where everything came from, and his answer involved a marriage, a handmade cloth with a map on it, and a tree with wings. So let us say them once, slowly, before the candle. Chaos, who is not disorder but a gap, an opening, the fact that there is room. Nobody made it, and Hesiod does not say where it came from. Gaia, the ground you are lying on, the ever-sure foundation, who keeps putting rulers in power and then opposing them. and who is still receiving offerings poured downward 2,500 years later. Tartaros, who is not only the prison, but the plain fact that beneath the bottom there is further down. Eros, who is desire, and who had to exist before anything could be produced by anything else, and who is not a child with a bow, but the reason separate things join. Erebos, the darkness, whose name went to sea twice, and is a volcano standing on ice with an open lake of fire in the crater. And Nyx, Black Knight, who is the only being in Homer that Zeus will not risk offending, who carries her son Sleep in her arms across the earth every evening, and who bore alone, with no father, doom and violent death and sleep, and the tribe of dreams, and blame and misery, and the daughters of evening, and the three who spin and measure and cut, and retribution, and deceit, and affection, and old age, and last of all, strife. And out of that same darkness, first of all her children, she bore the bright upper air and the daylight. Let the hillside in Boeotia go quiet now, and the sheep in their fold, and the man sitting in the cold an hour before any light. Let the gap be a gap. Let the golden apples stay on the tree at the western edge, with nobody reaching for them. Let the three sisters keep spinning without hurrying, and let sleep go out across the earth in his mother's arms, the way he does every evening, whether anyone notices or not. Imagine the whole of that first darkness far behind you, its long list of hard names no longer pressing on your thoughts. In your mind, reach back and close an invisible door onto the dark before anything, feeling it move on silent hinges, sealing the beginning and everything that came out of it in calm and order. Then see a single candle, its flame steady in the darkness. With a slow, gentle breath, blow that candle out and let the last curl of light fade into the night. Rest well, sleep deeply, and let the ancient stories carry you into the night.